Hey guys, welcome back to Your Mindset, Your Power. There is something that's been sitting with me lately. Not as a coach, not as someone with answers, just as a human being moving through the world and feeling this quiet weight in my chest. When did basic decency start feeling optional? And I want to talk about it today, honestly, gently, and without sides. Recently, I had the opportunity to be at a podcast conference, and I met some truly incredible people. Not just talented or successful people, but good people. People with depth, with stories, with real lives behind what you see on the surface. I had conversations one-on-one and in groups. And what surprised me the most wasn't the networking or the collaboration. I thought that was beautiful too. But it was how safe people felt. People opened up. They shared hard things they've been through, things they're going through right now. And these were people I had never met before. Yet there was this shared humanity in the room, this quiet understanding that you could be real and feel understood. And I felt deep compassion listening to their stories. But I also felt something else: hope. Because in a world that often feels loud, divided, and harsh, I was reminded that decency is still alive. Empathy is still alive. Dignity is still alive. And it made me reflect deeply on how much these values matter, especially right now. Because it can feel like basic human decency is becoming rare. Compassion, respect, the willingness to see each other as human, especially when things are uncomfortable. And I don't want to stay silent about that. So I want to be very clear before we go any farther. This is not a political episode. This is a human one. This is not about opinions, sides, or debates. It's about dignity. It's about compassion. It's about what happens when we don't turn our faces away from suffering. Because every single one of us carries something. And sometimes the most powerful thing we can offer another person is simply presence, a listening ear, a safe space, a moment where they feel seen instead of ignored. That's what today's episode is about. What decency really means, why it matters more than ever, and how choosing not to look away, especially from the most vulnerable, can quietly change everything. My hope is that by the end of this conversation, we feel more grounded, more connected, and more willing to support one another in meaningful ways. Not perfectly, just intentionally. And I want to start clarifying something because the word decency is often misunderstood a lot. So let's talk about what decency actually is and what it isn't. Decency is often confused with being passive or polite or agreeable. Like it means staying quiet, keeping things pleasant, not rocking the boat. But that's not what I mean. Decency is not silence, and it's not people pleasing. Decency is choosing to treat others as human, even when it's uncomfortable, inconvenient, or complicated. It means I can disagree with you without disrespecting you. I can hold a boundary without humiliating you. I can speak up without tearing someone down. I think of decency like a value knob, not an on-off switch. When emotions rise, when fear shows up, when conversations get tense, decency is what keeps us from turning the value all the way up into cruelty or contempt. And I don't have to agree with everyone to still believe they deserve dignity. Right? Because decency doesn't ask us to ignore reality, and it doesn't silence truth. It doesn't ask us to look away, and it doesn't ask us to pretend nothing is wrong. It simply asks that we don't lose our humanity in the process. Think of decency as the floor, not the ceiling. It's the minimum we stand on. So disagreement doesn't turn into dehumanization. So difference doesn't turn into indifference. And when that floor starts to crack, everything we built on top of it becomes unstable. So if decency is the floor we stand on, the next question becomes, what causes the floor to crack? Most of the time, it doesn't happen all at once. Life gets heavy. The world feels loud. There is a constant sense of tension, even when nothing is directly wrong in our lives. And when that pressure is always there, we get tired. Tired of hearing bad news. Tired of feeling overwhelmed. Tired of carrying things we don't know how to fix. So we start protecting ourselves in small ways. We pause less. We move faster. We stop staying with discomfort. Someone starts sharing something hard, and instead of really listening, we rush to change the subject. Or we offer quick advice. Or we mentally check out. Not because we don't care, but because staying present takes energy. We see someone struggling and think, I don't know the full story. I can't deal with this right now. This is too much. So we keep moving. We keep scrolling. We look the other way. We say, that's sad. And then we go back to our day. And that's the moment decency interrupts. It's that quiet pause where everything in us says, hold on, this is a human being. Not a headline, not a label, not a problem to solve, a person with fears, hopes, and struggles we may never fully see. Because when we stop seeing individuals, it becomes easier to accept things we might never accept if we were truly seeing the person in front of us. And empathy doesn't disappear because we don't care. It disappears when we stop slowing down, when we don't take time to imagine what someone else might be carrying, when we don't put ourselves in their place. And sometimes when we don't allow ourselves to do something about it. And when empathy fades, compassion usually follows. Compassion is what asks, how can I respond gently here? How can I help instead of judge? How can I offer support instead of ignoring them? That's how the floor starts to crack. Not through anger, not through hate, but through overwhelm, through avoidance, through slowly disconnected from what feels too heavy to carry. And this is where decency matters most. Because decency asks us to pause, empathy keeps us present, and compassion guides how we respond. Decency is not about fixing everything, it's about choosing not to turn away. And when turning away becomes a habit, when disconnection feels normal, it doesn't just affect how we treat others, my friend. It starts changing something inside us. There is something we don't talk about enough when it comes to decency. When it erodes, everyone loses. Not just the people who are hurt, but the people who lose touch with their own humanity in the process. Because when we disconnect from someone else's humanity, we slowly disconnect from our own. And it doesn't happen in an obvious way. No, it hardens us quietly. And the scary part, we don't notice it while it's happening. It's like losing sensitivity in your hands. You don't realize how numb you have become until you can't feel the warmth anymore. So you just stop reacting the same way. You just stop being surprised. You just stop being moved. And listen, I've seen this up close. People I know, people with values, people who love their families and want to do the right thing. But because hardship and adversity hasn't touched their immediate world, life keeps moving as usual. Routines stay intact. Comfort stays intact. And without meaning to, empathy starts to dull. Because when pain belongs to someone else, distance can start to feel normal. So they tell themselves, that's sad, that's unfortunate, that's terrible. And then they keep going. But over time, that distance doesn't just disconnect us from others. It disconnects us from ourselves, from our own humanity. And that's what makes this conversation so important. Because when we lose touch with that part, we don't become stronger. No, we become weaker, smaller. And every now and then, something cuts through that numbness. Something we can't scroll past. Something we can't unsee. And that's where I want to pause next. I want to slow down here for a minute, my friend. Because there are images I've seen lately that I honestly can't unsee. Fear in people's eyes. Children confused. Families in panic. And I'm not sharing that to shock anyone. I'm sharing it because something in me keeps coming back to one thought. Regardless of what anyone believes, no child should experience terror as normal. No child should have to watch adults screaming. No child should feel unsafe, powerless, and afraid and think, that's just life. And no human being should be treated like they don't matter. This is where decency stops being a concept. Because when you see fear like that, real fear, it does something to you. It reminds you that behind every story we hear, there are actual people living it. People with names, people with families, people who feel pain and love and worry, just like we do. And I know this topic can make people tense, uncomfortable. So I want to be clear about something, my friend. I'm not talking about sides here. I am talking about humanity. I'm talking about what we normalize, what we excuse, what we slowly learn to accept, and what it costs us when we do. And I also want to say something to parents, or really to anyone who influences a child. Children are watching us right now. They're watching what we laugh at, what we dismiss, what we ignore. They're watching who we show care for and who we don't. And we don't have to give them perfect words, but we do have to give them a clear message through how we live. Every human being has dignity. Even when it's complicated, even when we don't understand the full story, even when it doesn't affect our own lives. So let's bring this back to something real, because decency isn't something that only shows up in big moments or big conversations. It lives in ordinary life. It shows up in the way we speak to people when we are frustrated, in whether we choose respect instead of humiliation, in whether we listen to understand or listen just to respond. It shows up in small choices that most people will never notice, like holding a door when someone's hands are full, like offering your seat to someone who looks tired or overwhelmed, like checking in on someone who seems unusually quiet. Not for recognition, not for applause, just because it's the right thing to do. And this is where children learn what humanity looks like. Not from lectures, not from perfect speeches, from watching us. They notice how we speak about others. They notice whether we show patience when it's inconvenient. They notice when kindness feels natural in our lives or optional. And sometimes teaching compassion is simply allowing them to see us practice it. Helping someone, showing care, offering support without expecting anything back. Because when children witness compassion in action, they don't just learn kindness, they learn what it means to be responsible for what we treat other human beings. And this is not about being perfect, my friend. It's about being aware. It's about catching ourselves when we are rushing past someone's pain. It's about choosing presence when it would be easier to disengage. Because every time we choose to stay human in a moment like that, we reinforce that floor we talked about earlier. We strengthen it, not just for others, but for ourselves. And the truth is, decency rarely shows up in headlines. It shows up quietly, in conversations, in how people feel after they leave a room where we're in whether someone feels seen or invisible. That's where real change lives. And maybe the most powerful part of all of this is realizing that decency isn't something that belongs to society as a whole. It belongs to each of us, moment by moment, choice by choice. And that's where I want to leave you with one final reflection. But before we go to that reflection, I want to pause for just a moment and bring this full circle. Because today wasn't about being right. It wasn't about opinions or debates. It was about remembering something simple and incredibly important. That decency is the floor we stand on as human beings. That fear, overwhelm, and disconnection can slowly make that floor crack if we're not paying attention. And that when empathy and compassion fade, we don't just lose connection with others, we lose connection with ourselves. We talked about how children are always watching us, learning who matters by how we treat people who are vulnerable. And we talk about how decency doesn't live in big statements. It lives in everyday choices, in small moments, in how we show up when no one is watching. And maybe the truth is, decency has never been tested in easy times. It's tested when emotions run high, when opinions are loud, when fear is present, when it would be easier to step back, look away, or harden ourselves just enough to feel protected. And I think that's the moment we're living in right now, my friend. Not just as a society, but as a human being sharing the same world. And maybe the question isn't, what kind of world are we living in? Maybe the deeper question is, what kind of humans do we choose to be in moments like this? Because decency rarely announces itself. It doesn't trend. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't shout to be noticed. It shows up quietly in how we speak to people when we are frustrated, in whether someone feels safe sharing something vulnerable with us, in whether a child watching us learn that kindness is strength or weakness. It shows up in how we treat people when they have less power, less voice, less protection. And here's what I believe with my whole heart. Human dignity is not something that has to be earned. No, it's something every person carries simply because they're humans. Not because of where they were born, not because of their circumstances, not because of what they believe, not because of what they can give us in return, simply just because they are human. And when we forget that, when we start deciding who deserves compassion and who doesn't, we don't just change society, we change ourselves. But the beautiful part is this, my friend, we also have the power to rebuild it. And maybe rebuilding it doesn't happen through big promises, but through quiet, intentional choices. Through choosing empathy in small, everyday moments, through stopping long enough to truly see someone instead of rushing past them. Every time we do that, we reinforce something invisible but incredibly powerful. We reinforce the belief that humanity still matters. And maybe, just maybe, the most meaningful thing any of us can do right now is refuse to lose that. Refuse to lose our ability to feel, to care, to stay open, to see each other fully, even when it's uncomfortable. So before we close today, I want to leave you with this quiet question. No need to rush to answer it. Just let it sit with you. When someone crosses your path tomorrow, someone you agree with or maybe deeply disagree with, someone is struggling, or someone who feels invisible to everyone else, here's the question. Will I choose to see their humanity or turn away from it? Sometimes decency begins in moments that no one else sees. Thanks so much for being here with me today, my friend. I hope you have a wonderful week. And as always, remember, your mindset is your power.